Where I'd like to go with this is I would like to talk about an ESOP because most people do not know what an ESOP is. So I want to keep this really, really basic. I just want to preface by saying that you and I met as a result of Tony Robbins at Business Mastery back in 2015. And Tony actually did an ESOP for his employees at Robbins Research. So let's start simple. Let's share with the audience, what does an ESOP even stand for and what is its primary purpose?
Thank you. That's kind of like the perfect setup question for me. My passion is educating owners about different exit strategies, but also in particular, employee stock ownership plan. So what is an ESOP? Stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. The history goes kind of way back. But in the 50s, there was this gentleman, Louis Kelso, there's also this guy, Mortimer Adler, and they were proponents of inspiring owners to share equity with the employees. They said, look, America is a capitalist society. How do we create more capitalists? Wealth is concentrated. The more broad-based ownership we have in America, the more that America will thrive. And there was a first ESOP done in the late 50s. It was a printing company. And by 1974, they'd gotten the eyes and ears of Congress, and they were able to get ESOPs legislated along with IRAs and 401ks. So in 1974, there was something called the Employee Retirement Income Services Act that was passed, and that created ESOPs, 401ks, and IRAs. Kind of different retirement plans that had existed prior. And so what did that mean? It meant you could hire an independent trustee. You create your own buyer, essentially. You can hire an independent, ideally institutional trustee. And Congress said to that trustee, you're allowed to buy shares from the selling shareholder at fair market value. Do not pay more than fair market value, but you can buy shares from the company on behalf of a trust for the employees. So that's when ESOP started. And then 10 years later, they tried to come up with additional benefits to inspire owners. So they created something called a 1042 rollover. So if you sell 30% or more of the shares of your company to a retirement trust for your employees.
Who, by the way, the employees are not paying for it. It is not coming out.
Yeah, that's a key.
The employees
that's one of the best. Oh my gosh, they could never afford to buy the shares. What's happened over the decades since 74 all the way to now, Congress kept bolting on huge tax incentives that basically pay for the whole thing. Let's pretend we sell 30% of the company for $10 million to the retirement trust.
And that's because the company was valued at $10 million. So we get a valuation first.
If we're selling 30% of it, that company's
right
at 10 million. The company's valued at what, 35 million.
Right. Okay. So the company's worth 35 million. It's valued.
And we're going to sell 30%. Let's say it's worth 33 million, and we're going to sell 30% for $10 million.
So let's use me as the example. So I'm the only owner of the company, or my wife and I are the only owners of the company. And we say, you know what? We want to take some chips off the table. You know, we're getting a little older and we don't want to sell the company. We're not ready to give up control. We don't want our competition to know about the sale, but we want to reward our employees and we don't want to pay any taxes today.
I'll switch over to a simpler example. Let's pretend the whole company's worth $10 million.
Okay.
It's making $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth 5 times the fair market value, 5 times. Typically, companies are worth 4.5 to 10, 12 times. Interesting, in your particular niche, there's a premium. So it's more like 10 times, not 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
But $2 million in annual earnings, probably paying close to $1 million in taxes. If they're in a high tax state, they got $1 million left over. The company's worth 5 times what we call EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and that's $10 million. And so what are your options? Well, if you just sold your company to a third party for $10 million, in California, you'd net $6.3 million. In Florida, you'd net $8 million. This is because of the capital gains rates. If your particular company has a lot of equipment and you took a lot of bonus depreciation, your taxes are even higher because you think you're getting capital gains treatment, but you end up getting ordinary income treatment for a big chunk. So you could end up paying 50% or more in taxes on that sale. So that's always one door. And to your point, Frank, if you're going out to market with your particular franchise operation, you're opening the kimono to your competitors. Right. Oh, this is how these guys do business. This is why they're so successful. And then it's, well, should we buy them? Or, well, we just learned how they do what they do. Maybe we'll just do it ourselves. Right. And now you've created a competitor, right? But with an ESOP, you don't do that. So you get this eligible known buyer, which is this trustee who buys the shares on behalf. And we might say to you initially, you'll say, we want to be here for another 5-10 years. Let's get our toe in the water. And if you sell 30% or more to the trust, you get to defer your capital gains. You get a year to reinvest in other stuff, stocks and bonds of U.S. operating companies. You can do actively managed real estate. There's something called a floating rate note. There's a way to reinvest, and then you get to defer your gains. And there's an art to that, so that ideally you'll invest in stuff that you'll own all the way till you pass away, and then you'll get a stepped up basis, never pay capital gains. There's an art to that. It goes outside the scope of this conversation. But in this case, so let's say, you and your wife want to explore this. So we'll do an analysis. We'll say, hey, why don't you sell 30 to 49% of this company initially to the ESOP trust? It's worth $10 million. Okay, we'll get you, let's say we sell 49%. We'll get you 4.9 million, probably get you 5 million or a little bit more, actually, even though we're selling 49%. And now you're going to sell $5 million of shares to the retirement trust. They're going to sit unallocated. We can go out to a bank and put debt on your company up to about 3.5 times EBITDA. In your case, your EBITDA is 2 million, so we could raise the whole 5 million.
So I'm the owner. I'm getting a check for $5 million.
Correct.
And then I'm going to reinvest that, like you said, in stocks, bonds, floating rate notes, actively managed real estate. I'm not paying any taxes upfront on that $5 million. My employees in return are getting shares of stock of the company that they can't cash in. It goes into Correct. A retirement account. And I continue to run the company like I did Correct. Yesterday. Nothing changes, except Correct. I have a relationship now with a trustee, and the trustee is somebody who is sort of like the representative for the employees, right? That's the Correct. Best way to describe them.
They're a fiduciary watching out for the employees' interests. Yes. So just to dive a little deeper, we would have gone out and written a financial information memorandum for the company, and we would have circulated it and done a competitive auction to raise capital. So we would have reached out to 10. This is my putting on my CSG managing director ESOP hat. We'd go out and we circulate that financial information to 10 to 30 banks, probably get 3 or 4 term sheets. Here's how much money they're willing to lend, at what rates. Our claim to fame is we raise more money to finance leveraged ESOP transactions, which means you're borrowing money from a bank with no personal guarantees, than all the other advisors combined. We raise close to $1 billion each year to finance these transactions. And one of the reasons so many banks are willing to lend to employee stock ownership companies is because of the tax benefits, which I'll address in a little bit. Because of those tax benefits, ESOP companies, even partial ESOP companies, have a lot more after-tax cash flow to be able to service that debt. So we went out and borrowed $5 million. Now today, that's going to be at 7.5%. Standard overnight funds rate called SOFR, plus 2%, way up from a year ago. That interest is still deductible from the company. The other interesting thing about this ESOP is when you go out and borrow money, I know I can get into the weeds here, you get to pay it off with pre-tax instead of after-tax dollars. So you get to pay it down a lot faster. What we'll do is we'll borrow $5 million by the company, no personal guarantees to you and your wife, Frank.
Right.
And then the company will loan that $5 million to the retirement trust. The retirement trust will hand $5 million to you and your wife. You will hand $5 million in shares to the trust. And when we're done with all this, the trust owes the company $5 million. The company owes the bank $5 million.
Right. I don't personally, that's what I wanted to get to. Personally, Frank, the owner of the company, do not owe the bank the $5 million. My company does. My company basically bought me out.
Yes. Well, in this case, they bought you out for half.
Right.
Well, 49%.
Right. Only half. All right. I let the company only buy half of the company from me.
in this example, right? And we'll talk about how it gets even more amazing if you become what's known as 100% ESOP. So at this point, you got $5 million. You have a year. It's called a 1042 rollover to reinvest and defer all your capital gains. The company owes the bank $5 million. If something happens to the company and the company goes under for some reason, there are no personal guarantees. Your $5 million is safe outside of the business. The ESOP now owns $5 million of shares, and it owes the company for those shares. So each year, the company will make a contribution to the ESOP trust, typically 25% of your payroll, sometimes some dividends. The ESOP trust will hand it right back to the company in payment of that $5 million note.
It is circular.
So, yeah, it's circular. So let's say, so maybe it would do a $250,000 contribution. The $250,000 would come right back to the company. Now the trust is allocating 250 divided by 5 million, 5%, I think, of the shares to all the employees based on their W-2 salaries. They get allocated shares based on their W-2 salaries of whatever pool of shares is available each year.
Right. So this is not discretionary. Me as the owner, I can't decide, I really like my director of IT. He's such a good guy. I want him to get X. My director of marketing, well, he's fairly new. No, that's not how it works.
Correct. It's governed by the IRS and Department of Labor.
Perfect.
And they wanted to be fair. So they said, look, if you're making 100,000 and your person sitting next to you is making 50, you're going to get allocated double the shares.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So all the way up to about 315,000, the shares get allocated based on your W-2 salaries relative to everyone else. And then above that, it's disregarded for tax purposes, or it's disregarded. You're not allowed to be allocated shares if it's above 315,000. So now your employees get allocated shares. Once a year, they get a statement. Here's how many shares you've been allocated. Here's how many shares you're vested in. Typically, you vest over 6 years, years 2 through 6, like a 401k, 20% a year. And then at a certain point in time, it's a retirement plan. Each year, hey, here's how many shares I've been allocated. Here's how many shares I'm vested in. And here's the value of those shares. And the first couple of years, the company's paying off $5 million of debt. So there's not a whole lot of money there. But after those first few years, what I see, years 3, 4, and 5, typically people's accounts start to hockey stick. Some companies have 50 employees generating 5 million in profits a year. Other companies will have 10 employees doing that. Other companies will have 300. It all depends on the ratio of employees to headcount as to what it means. But here's a really interesting statistic that I just heard from CSG founder Larry Kaplan. In 2022, we have clients, and it was like you, Frank. You did the ESOP transaction back in 2015.
Right.
And a few years later, you said, Richard, I'm burnt out. I've been running this thing since the 90s. And now I've stepped up to chairman, but I'm still working too hard. I really want to just have a final sale. Without talking numbers for you said to me he goes, if I had waited and sold to private equity, I would have netted less because you got to sell a big chunk and defer all your gains on the first part.
And I made all my money when I deferred. All that money, just happened to hit it with the market, but I was able to invest all that money that I got. So I was reaping the benefits of the market. Yeah, you got a tremendous amount of liquidity and diversification. And then you got another paycheck. And when you got that second sale paycheck, the interesting part was the impact to your employees. In your case, it was, you ended up with more money than if you waited and sold and paid capital gains on the whole amount. Instead, you got to get a bunch of money off the table, not pay capital gains on that. And then when you sold the company, not only did you end up with more after-tax cash, all things considered, but your employees, you can explain what happened there. Yeah, I need to pause you there, Richard, because this was one of the most defining moments of my time of ever being a business owner. It was one thing to allocate the shares. When I announced them to my employees, guys, I have great news for you. I've sold the company to you. When I said that to them in early 2016, of course, they were shocked. They had no idea what that meant. And you prepared me. You said they're not going to know what that means. Make sure you prepare them. So we knew that education of an ESOP is extremely important and ongoing communication, right? So they get all these shares, but they can't do anything with those shares until I decide with the trustee to sell. Now, obviously in 2017, we had an incredible opportunity to actually sell and to go through the liquidity transaction. And I have got to say that that was one of the most defining moments in my career for my wife and I to sit down with our CEO and our CFO and bring in one employee at a time and tell them how much money they just got, like literally in cash, that they were able to convert their shares to, because the shares probably like tripled in price. And now because we had the liquidity event, they could cash in. I don't know if there was enough tissue boxes to get us through the day. And I will spare sharing individual stories because of time, but I got to tell you though, it was life-changing for my wife and I, as much as it was life-changing for my employees, on not just a financial level, but emotional, because I didn't realize the amount of impact I was really making on my employees' lives. And it did change them. They always treated the company before they were ESOP owners, before they were owners of the company, they treated it like they were owners of the company, right? They didn't act differently once they were ESOP owners. However, if somebody's not the right employee, they're not going to be the right employee before an ESOP or after an ESOP. It doesn't change anybody. But the lives that you can impact and rewarding your employees who got you there. It wasn't me that got I9 Sports to where it was. It was an entire team that did it. And to reward them made it all the more worthwhile. And on top of that, to have it tax deferred was just absolutely the cherry on top. I did not do it for tax deferment. I did it for the primary reason I knew it was time for me to move on. And I couldn't think of a better way to do it than pay the employees. Don't pay Uncle Sam. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.